Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first night of the third International Short Film Festival in Izmit, 2002, online. As most of you know, the theme of this year's festival is Woman, and there'll be a special awards on Friday for the national and international winners in that category. Akin, can we have photo and video, please? Lauro Fusco is an Italian bard and a performance artist. This short video, between poetry, dance, and the environment that she prepared for tonight, tells of the profound identity journey of women. This is yet another step in Laura's ongoing search for Shakespeare's Ophelia. The video?
Yes, starting.
Souris, la même, je le montrerai, la nudité de l'endormi, je résumerai les couleurs et sa manière de sortir du sommeil et de l'éveil, les cheveux, ici, alors je serai tout entier.
I think our families are forgetting that we can be heard. And of course, woman is our theme this evening. For those of you following on Facebook, you can leave comments and questions, and we'll get back to you later. Woman. There's one big difference between every repressed minority the world has ever known and women. Women have never been a minority. The human race, or as we also call it, mankind, in just about every language, has always functioned as a patriarchy. Well, not always. There are some more ancient civilizations where woman was dominant, but generally it's been a man's world, a system that relies on domination. Why is that? Well, warfare of all kinds is man-made, with sex and rape being important weapons of conquest. Throughout the animal world, the male leaves the seed, the female's task is to produce and suckle children. Chauvinist man insists that this is the way of the world, and any change is against nature, against God or against the gods, against the all-important demands of the stock market and Wall Street. But there have been feminist movements throughout modern history. In the 1960s, thanks to the contraceptive pill, there was a sexual revolution for equality by Western women, driven mostly by the French and American feminist movements. Unfortunately, many men were able to dismiss this using pejorative insults about lack of feminism, that it was a lesbian-led power grab. Well, otherwise, a woman's place is in the home, isn't it? However, we men were also dismissive of women's intelligence and creative talent, two fields where women have at least equal ability with men. But remember, men control the press and television, where woman was one of the major images to be manipulated, but also the main market of their publicity campaigns. Let's hear what Elena Romanato has to say about that.
Good evening. Well, why woman in advertising? I'm a journalist and I worked with many newspapers or magazines. And as journalist at Mille Canali magazine, I had a section dedicated to TV commercials. And I realized that advertising has always portrayed the woman, creating female stereotypes that reflect the different era of society. And over the years, stereotypes have changed and increased. It's quite difficult to say exactly when the first form of advertising took place. For example, the signs placed above the shops during Greek or Roman Empire were a form of advertising, but the 20th century with radio and TV is the century of advertising. The word of advertising has got its own characteristic. It uses visual techniques, framing, colors, sounds, according to the kind of product that to be promoted and the audience to reach. Usually TV commercials have two different styles of storytelling: the slice of life, fairy tale, where the product is a kind of magic object, and the gag. According to Vance Packard, who is the author of The Inner Persuader, advertising must seduce and persuade, and woman is at the same time object and target of this art of persuasion. If advertising is direct persuasion, we have a product, a claim, a command, a scientific reasoning, for example, for a medicine, or even a testimonial. If persuasion is masked, not direct, there are three different techniques. Association, when the product is associated to images, colors, and sounds, evoking a particular atmosphere, or commercial with images without words, and is typical, for example, for perfume commercials. To convince, seduce, and win over an audience consumer, commercials often use stereotypes. But why? Because advertising must simplify reality to make its message clear. Using stereotypes, the message is simpler, more comprehensible and persuasive, highlighting values that the brand wants to transmit. Woman in advertising has always been a stereotype since the beginning. The first stereotype was the housewife, the angel at the heart of the first radio commercial or magazine advertising in the 20s or the 30s. In the decades, housewife in commercials remains, but changes. In the 60s, she's not only has to cook or do the washing, she must take care of the house, now is an apartment. She has to feed her children with industrial food and host guests with the wine, martini, or whatever. In the 70s, advertising opens to eroticism, showing a more aggressive woman, a sexy woman, and a female sex object. For example, a very young Brooke Shield for Calvin Klein jeans advertising was very sexy, but she was only 15. And in the 80s, woman body and fitness are put at the center, but we also have the self-confident woman, the manager. In the 90s, female sexual objectification is completed. And in this period, sexism is very common. This phenomenon captures the attention of the European Union. In July 1997, Marlene Lenz, member of the European Commission for Women's Rights, presents a resolution against woman discrimination in advertising. It is based on the fact that from 1992 to 1995, authorities of 11 country members of European Union had to deal with complaints about woman image in advertising. For example, in Germany, Austria, and Spain, complaints were from 25 to 51%. Nowadays, there are many stereotyped women in advertising. We still have the housewife, but she's a mother and wife in a very modern version. She's with smartphones and tablets. We have the unprejudiced woman, the bad girl who touches the erotic imagination, the fitness woman, the manager, but also the grandmother or the working woman and the sexy woman, of course. If you can show the photo number 1, please. This is a very sexy Uma Thurman in an advertising of Louis Vuitton, for example. And with mass consumerism, new media, and a lot of communication, advertising companies must create commercials that take the audience attention more than their competitor. But in pursuing this aim, they sometimes exaggerate. For example, in 2007, in Italy and Spain, Consumer Association and authorities asked for recalling an advertising of Dolce & Gabbana that had a very, very strong scene. There is a man who is bent over a woman, immobilized the woman, and another 4 young men are looking at the scene. This advertising was recalled. And now to close, a commercial that had completely changed the way of portraying women. It is The Real Beauty of Dove. And in this commercial, there are some women who were asked to describe themselves to the FBI trained forensic artist, Gil Zamora. Gil Zamora was behind the curtain and drew a portrait of that women, based on their own description. A random stranger was then asked to describe the same woman to Zamora to see how their description would differ. The result were 2 completely different portraits. The one based on the stranger's portrayal was more beautiful, happier, and more accurate. So Dove created a short film with his brand, showing the women's reaction to their portraits. If you can show the portraits, please, Akin. The commercial, excuse me.
I'm a forensic artist. Worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board. We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent features?
Kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm going to ask you some questions about the person you met earlier. I'm going to ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke. She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes. So here we go. This is the sketch that you helped me create. And that's a sketch that somebody described to me. So yeah, that's.
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks politics more open, friendly, and happy. I should be more grateful of my natural beauty. It impacts the choices and the friends that we make, the jobs we apply for, how we treat our children. It impacts everything. Couldn't be more critical to your happiness.
Do you think you're more beautiful than you say?
Yeah. We spend a lot of time as women analyzing and trying to fix the things that aren't quite right. And we should spend more time appreciating the things that we do like.
Well, this commercial or film, because it's in the middle, has opened to a new way of portraying woman in advertising, because she's not a stereotype, but she's a human being with her feelings, emotions, sensitivity, vulnerability, love, surprise. But few companies follow this example, and there is still a lot of job to do against stereotypes of women in advertising. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. Akin, do we have any questions or comments?
Currently, no.
No, nothing for, well, thank you very much, Elena.
As we are ready.
Now, another point of view, another view of woman's place in the world. I'll let Nurcan introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. First, I would like to introduce myself. I am a mechanical engineer. I have worked 24 years for a world-leading company in automotive industry. I have been managing my own companies in industrial furnace and mining industries for 5 years. 3 years ago, I thought that Turkey has been tending to an irreversible disaster in terms of regime, economy, justice, education, human rights, external affairs, demographics, etc. And thus, I decided to be involved in politics in order to contribute to recovering efforts on these aspects of our country. I have been elected as councillor in Metropolitan Municipality of Kocaeli 1.5 years ago. I'll speak on the theme of women in politics in this panel. Before going to this theme, I would like to mention about why we need more women in politics. First of all, there is growing recognition of the untapped capacity and talents of women and women's leadership. The full and equitable participation of women in public life is essential to building and sustaining strong, vibrant democracies. Accordingly, the meaningful participation of women in national, local, and community leadership roles has become an important focus of global development policy. Still, some may ask why it matters if women become political leaders, elected policymakers, or civil society activists. Why does the world need more women involved in all aspects of the political process? Women's political participation results in tangible gains for democracy, including greater responsiveness to citizen needs, increased cooperation across party and ethnic lines, and more sustainable peace. There is strong evidence as more women are elected to office, there is also a corollary increase in policy making that emphasizes quality of life and reflects the priorities of families, women, and ethnic and racial minorities. Women's political participation has profound, positive, and democratic impacts on communities, legislators, political parties, and citizens' lives, and helps democracy deliver. Women in government are underrepresented in most countries worldwide. In many countries, women have had inadequate opportunities in social participation, especially in striving for political rights and power in the government and different institutions. This historical tendency still persists, although women are increasingly being elected to be heads of state and government. As of October 2019, the global participation rate of women in national level parliaments is 24.5%. In 2013, women accounted for 8% of all national leaders and 2% of all presidential posts. Furthermore, 75% of all female prime ministers and presidents have taken office in the past 2 decades. Women may face a number of challenges that affect their ability to participate in political life and become political leaders. Gender inequality within families, inequitable division of labor within households, and cultural attitudes about gender roles further subjugate women and serve to limit their representation in political life. There are numerous social and cultural barriers female political candidates often face. These include sex stereotyping, political socialization, lack of preparation for political activity, financing a campaign, and balancing work and family. In the media, women are often asked how they would balance the responsibilities of elected office with those to their families, something men are never asked. A 2020 study found that being promoted to the position of mayor or parliamentarian doubles the probability of divorce for women, but not for men. The United Nations has identified 6 avenues by which female participation in politics and government may be strengthened. These avenues are equalization of educational opportunities, quotas for female participation in governing bodies, legislative reform to increase focus on issues concerning women and children, financing gender-responsive budgets to equally take into account the needs of men and women, increasing the presence of sex disaggregated statistics in national research data, and furthering the presence and agency of grassroots women's empowerment movements. I would like to mention about the women in politics in Turkey as well. Turkey gave full political rights to women, including the right to elect and be elected locally in 1930, nationwide in 1934. According to the right, Turkish women have gained to the elect and elected rights before many European countries' women, such as France, Italy, and Greece, provided by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Article 10 of the Turkish Constitution bans any discrimination, state or private, on the grounds of sex. It is the first country which had a woman as the president of its constitutional court. Despite Turkey being a patriarchal society, there are many historical examples of Turkish women involved in politics life and activism. In 1993, a woman, Tansu Çiller, was elected as prime minister. In the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, there are 101 women deputies, which is corresponding to 17% of the total. It clearly conflicts with the concept of mirror representation, aiming to achieve gender parity in public office. In other words, the proportion of women in leadership doesn't match the proportion of women in the population that they govern. There are 5 parties in the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. One of them, People's Democratic Party, has a woman co-chair. The other one is my party, named E-Party, which has a woman leader, Meral Akşener. She served as Minister of the Interior and was a vice speaker in the parliament. In 2016, she led a group of opposition in the Nationalist Movement Party, and she founded the E-Party 3 years ago. Meral Akşener is known to her supporters as Asena, which is mythical she-wolf. She believes that Turkish democracy is under threat, and E-Party wants a free society and to fix the problems of the Turkish judiciary system. Democratic participation, a strong parliament, and the national will are irreplaceable. Akşener says that many who are joining her movement are Turkish citizens who are chafing under the restrictions imposed by the government on public gatherings, freedom of expression, Turkish judiciary system, and constraints placed on the media. I hope E-Party comes into power in the first election and we can recover Turkish democracy. As you see, from suffragettes to modern day feminists, women and men have fought long and hard for women's right to vote and hold office. Progress is clear. As of 2015, women in every country in the world have the right to vote. The first nation to grant female suffrage was New Zealand in 1893, and the last country was Saudi Arabia in 2015. Today, several countries are led by females, and some countries, such as Finland, also have a cabinet dominated by women. These achievements have been possible in large part thanks to gender equality measures. But progress is slow and uneven. Women are still underrepresented in politics, parliaments, and public life. Attitudes towards women candidates are still largely characterized by deeply ingrained stereotypes, and political opponents will often use those stereotypes to question women's capabilities. When we talk about women's political participation, it is easy for us to imagine the empty seats around the decision-making table, and a little more difficult to picture the many obstacles and challenges women face to get into those seats. There is a growing recognition that women in 2020 are marginalized from political and public life. In the past few years, we have seen this play out in high-profile elections in the US and around the world. Women are putting themselves forward for elections more and more, yet their numbers are still far behind those of men. Even though it is widely accepted that development, peace, and prosperity in societies cannot be achieved without half of the world's population, women continue to be sidelined in decision-making. The stigma against women in politics is still alive and well. They continue to face structural, socioeconomic, institutional, and cultural barriers. Tackling those barriers takes effort on the part of every element of society, whether it is government, civil society, the media, academia, the private sectors, youth, and even men. That's all from my side, Roger.
Well, in spite of all that, do you enjoy being involved in politics?
Yes, as I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, it is necessary in Turkey. Everybody should be involved in politics in Turkey.
But you get real pleasure from it as well.
Yes, yes.
Good, lovely. There are more and more fields where women are increasingly successful, but as you said, they still have to deal with chauvinist attempts at domination. I mean, you probably agree that women know more about childbirth and baby rearing than men do. So why do we in the West find Dr. Spock and his male colleagues telling us what's best? Women have been preparing family meals for centuries, but most of the high-powered TV chefs are men. Time and time again, women's excellence, women's inventiveness, women's innovations have been dismissed simply because they're only women. For example, women inventors have a much higher percentage possibility of registering a patent if they do it in partnership with a man. Teams of women or single women have very limited chances of support or success. Here's one really horrible example of that prejudice. There were 3 people who isolated and modeled the DNA helix: Rosalind Franklin and 2 men. The 2 men shared the Nobel Prize. Rosalind Franklin was never recognized until after she died. But some women inventors have received recognition. However, if your government takes away your invention, they may never pay you for it. Photograph number 1, please, Akin. Hedy Lamarr was an Austrian actress and an inventor who became a Hollywood star. And in fact, one of her inventions has helped bring us together tonight. She was called the most beautiful woman in the world, but she said, any girl can be glamorous. All you have to do is stand there, stand still, and look stupid. but she continued inventing things right up until her death in the year 2000. She never received a single payment for her most famous invention, not from the US government that commandeered it, using it during World War II to search for enemy submarines, nor later when they used it during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then again in the early 1900s and 1990s, her system was incorporated into Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And it was used by Dr. Gladys West, an African-American woman who invented GPS. We've all been using at least two of those this evening. But let's go back to the beginning of cinema, what our festival's about. Photograph 2A, please, Akan. Sarah Bernhardt was a French actress manager with a professional career that spanned 60 years and which took her all over the world, including 9 tours of the United States. And she was known as the Golden Voice. But this was at the beginning of the last century. What was the use of a golden voice in silent movies? Well, Sarah Bernhardt was innovative, and obviously sound was very important for her. Her first film was the duel scene from the production of Shakespeare's Hamlet, where she played Hamlet, she directed the film, she choreographed the fight, and she added a soundtrack to the film. This was in the year 1900 for the Paris exhibition. She recorded the synchronized sounds of the swords and, some people say, the feet of the duelists as well, although this might have been the sound of the feet of the audience. Nevertheless, she produced one of the first multimedia performances in the year 1900. Photo 2B, please, Akan. She was also very clever in her choice of other films of her theatrical productions, with several popular operas, which meant there was a soundtrack in the minds of many of the audience. And those operas had glamour and prestige that film very often lacked. This was also the way several Italians later approached filmmaking. During the First World War, superstar Bernhardt invited filmmakers into her home, made propaganda films for the French army, and appeared in several documentaries. Even after she had a leg amputated in 1915, she continued to work in theater and in silent movies with a wooden leg. She died in Paris while working on the production of another film, La Voyante, The Fortune Teller, in March 1923. Meanwhile, about the same period in Hollywood, a British-Canadian actress was crowned Queen of the Movies after she was adopted as America's sweetheart. This young woman had toured third-rate American theaters with her mother, her brother, and sister until Gladys Smith finally landed a role in a Broadway play in 1907, and Gladys Smith became Mary Pickford. Photo number 3, please, Akan. And she did a screen test for the Biograph Company. As she said about her early success, I played cleaning women, secretaries, women of all nationalities. I decided that if I could get into as many pictures as possible, I'd become known and there would be a demand for my work. In 1909, she appeared in 51 films, nearly one a week, and things got better and better. By 1916, only Charlie Chaplin was more popular than Mary Pickford. This was when she signed a contract for $10,000 a week, had full authority over the production of the film she starred in, and received half of the film's profits, making her the first actress to sign $1 million contract, which is worth about $18.5 million today. In 1919, Pickford, together with director D.W. Griffith, Charlie Chaplin, and Douglas Fairbanks, formed United Artists. She was 27. And she sometimes played little boys and little girls. And yet, she became the most powerful woman who's ever worked in Hollywood. Too much success, perhaps. Later, she became an alcoholic, and her brother and sister both eventually died from alcohol-related causes. Photo number 4, please. Ida Lupino came from a theater and circus family, and you can trace her back to the Italian Renaissance, so it's no surprise she became an actress. And she took her theater very seriously, writing her first play when she was only 7, while she was touring the United Kingdom in a theater company. She studied and learned Shakespeare's plays. Later, she studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, before returning to the UK theatre touring. Her family Lupino connections helped to make the transition from theatre to cinema, and several of her films were seen by Hollywood producers, which led to an invitation to go to California for a screen test. She didn't get the part of Alice in Wonderland, but she did get a 5-year contract. But she still wanted to write and direct. You'll find a very comprehensive biography on Wikipedia, but she's on my list today because of her talent in so many fields of movie making. Her hands-on, no-nonsense directing, almost always anyway, incorporating a social consciousness often superior to most male directors in that man's world. This made her a very popular and a very important writer-director. She started an independent production company, Filmmakers, with her husband in 1949. The first film she co-wrote, co-produced, and took over direction of after Elmer Clifton had a heart attack was Not Wanted, about unmarried pregnancy, a sensitive subject that prompted President Roosevelt's wife to discuss the film with her on a national radio program. Later films dealt with subjects which were even more difficult, even threatening to puritanical Americans. Subjects like bigamy, rape, racism, and interracial relationships, and the patriarchal structure that existed in Hollywood. That was her pet hate. If you want to know more about her, get a copy of Ida Lupino Behind the Camera, published after her death in 1995. And there's also an excellent retrospective in French. But she was never nominated for an Oscar. In fact, only 4 women have been nominated as Best Director, and only one of those has won. Which brings me to Catherine Bigelow. Photo number 5, please, Akin. Her 1991 film, Point Break, became a cult classic. But then after that, her career seemed to lose direction, and her films were mostly commercial failures. This might have been the point where she decided to retire or direct unspectacular TV movies and series. Except she took her latest film to the 2008 Venice Film Festival, where it attracted European interest. Some months later, this film, The Hurt Locker, closed the Maryland Film Festival and was finally released in the United States in June 2009. At the 2010 Academy Awards, she and her film won 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. But Hurt Locker is the only Best Picture directed by a woman. Probably the best way for women excuse me, the best way for women to achieve recognition nowadays is in the arts, or for them to work in some new expanded field. Biotechnology and the pharmaceutical industry seem to be the sectors with the highest proportion of female innovators, where over 53% of the patents have at least one female inventor and innovator. But the percentage with only women inventors is suspiciously low. It's still difficult for a woman to succeed in a man's world. Do I have any questions? No?
No.
Okay.
Someone say hello to everyone.
Ah, hello to you too.
Good evening to everyone.
Well, we've talked about the position of women in our world, but there's one thing we haven't discussed very much anyway, but which each of us should think about before we go to sleep tonight. Today, the 25th of November, has been the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women. That's all for tonight. I know you'd like to thank Elena and Nurcan for their contribution, as well as Akin working busily behind the scenes. And don't forget the award ceremony on Friday. And tomorrow evening, I've heard from a little bird that there will be a special program in Turkish at, is it 6:30 in the evening?
Yeah,
European time?
6:30 by European time, 8:30 by
8:30 Turkish time, with the star and director of one of the award-winning Turkish films. So that's something not to miss. But then on Friday, we'll have the prize giving, and well, then I'll be sending you information quite soon about the 4th Izmit International Short Film Festival 2021, either online or hopefully meeting each other again in Izmit in Turkey. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night to everyone, and see you
Good
tomorrow.
night, everybody.
Bye.